which is Dr. Asher Larmie. Now, you might know them. They identify as non-binary, by the way, so I will use the they, them pronoun as much as possible. If that's confusing to you, then, tough luck. If that's how they want to be known, that's fine. They call themselves the Fat Doctor. And again, this is the one that's going to get me into trouble, by the way, because it always does. Whenever you go and look at the work of anybody to do with health at every size and all that sort of stuff, for some reason people don't listen to the message anymore. People think you're going after the person. And that is, of course, not the way at all. I've never met Dr. Larmie, and I've no idea what they're like. They might be lovely people, right? I just don't know. However, let me start this by saying this is not about health at every size. Anybody who knows this podcast, who's listened to the podcast, who's read any of the blogs or seen any of the information, we all fundamentally agree you can't just judge people on weight and size, right? There's also no doubt that there's significant medical bias based on race, gender, weight, and all that sort of stuff. If you're looking to find more information on that, if you think it's all shit and you want an entertaining 15 minutes, look at the bit that John Oliver did for Last Week with John Oliver years ago, before this was even a big thing, right? Health at every size is fundamentally, it's a very important thing. When you go to the doctor and you say, I suffer from XYZ, the doctor shouldn't immediately jump to the conclusion that you being overweight or obese, and we'll separate those terms in a little bit, is the cause of your problem. You could be having a heart attack, for do you know what I mean? So we have to make sure that things check out, that is not the starting point. We all agree. I also, I've used this example an awful lot. The judgment, we all agree, I hope everybody listening to this agrees, that the judgment associated with fatness, when you see a fat person walking into McDonald's buying a Big Mac, like that client I just spoke about a little while ago, when you see them buying a Big Mac, you can go, that fat piece of shit shouldn't be eating a Big Mac, because you don't know where they're coming from, right? Like I said before, my client goes from 380 down to 320 and then decides to have a Big Mac. It's just a snapshot. I've told this story before about this personal trainer friend of mine who is in pretty good shape and is one of the most knowledgeable personal trainers I know. But she has a Big Mac or a McDonald's, God knows what, every Friday at 6 o'clock. That's her schedule. That's how she eats, and it's not for me, right? The rest of the week she eats different stuff, but 6 o'clock is Big Mac time, right? And she likes that. That's her yum. And I always say, like I said on the Fittest Fat Kid podcast, I'm not here to yuck anybody's yum, right? I always find that diet is something that I'm not judging anybody's diet. But this person who's in shape, this is a person who trains, she lifts weights competitively. For a competitive weightlifter, you need a certain build. You need to have at least mass on your side. You can't be completely and utterly ripped with low body fat percentage. We're talking powerlifting, not bodybuilding. So she has a McDonald's or Burger King or whatever it is at 6 o'clock. And the same client that's been with her for 5-6 months, that had tremendous results with her, that gets stronger and bigger and whatever she wants every week, drives past that McDonald's every week after work. And every week on a Friday, sees this person eating her Big Mac and then cancels her personal training sessions with the client, with the PT, because she says, I can't train with somebody who doesn't live what they preach. Right now, let's, you know when we say a picture's worth 1,000 words, well, that's horseshit. A picture is just a still. It is just a temporary glimpse into a relatively probably fake, so that these days on Instagram, a fake sort of situation, right? This person was getting results. The PT is in good health and good shape and has a shit ton of knowledge. And that's all you need in a good PT. I always say this. Don't go to the nearest ripped guy. Don't go to V-Shred just because he's shredded. Go to Athlete X because he's better than V-Shred is. Do you know what I mean? That is the thing. Go with the person who has the most knowledge. And, you don't just... If you don't know what someone's journey is, you don't judge them on that. So this is a diet neutral sort of bit. And like I said, that sort of thing is obviously unacceptable, right? We don't judge people for being overweight, or at least we shouldn't judge people for being overweight. I'm sure it happens, right? However, the science denial that comes from people like Dr. Larmie is a problem. Right? I dealt with things like this before, where comments like, there isn't a single study that shows being overweight is bad for your health. Comments like that before from Virgi Tovar and all those people. But blogs like, Dr. Larmie wrote a blog called My Big Fat Apology Part 1. And I'll just, the same way that I did with Dr. Mosley, I'll just go and dissect this a little bit. It says in there, let's start with the basics. Obesity, and she used asterisks for the word E, which fucking annoys me. It's a medical term, it's not offensive. Does not increase your risk of dying from COVID. There's a definite link between the two, but that's all we know right now. Even public health evidence is insufficient to draw any real conclusions, and that was back in July. Since then, there have been studies that have shown that there's absolutely no impact on hospitalization, ventilation, or death rate. Which begs the question, why? Why is there a link between body mass and serious COVID when one is not causing the other? And this, in their words, this, ladies and gentlemen, is the bit that nobody wants to talk about because it's awkward and uncomfortable and impacts people in positions of power and authority. Because serious COVID-19 is also linked to poverty, and they're right on this, right? I think so, but we'll get to that. It is linked to race and ethnicity. It is linked to level of education. What do these groups all have in common? Well, amongst other things, they've all been shown to receive poorer quality healthcare. What's that you say? Surely it can't be possible, implying that the medical profession does not provide equal care for all. Why, yes, I am. That's exactly what I'm saying. Right. And this is important. Like I said, we have already established medical bias is a thing. We know this is a thing, and we know that this is a real problem. But the study she linked to was posted on the JAMA network. And this is her link, and I'll link to it. Right? This is because this is very, very important. When Dr. Larmie claims that the bit, why is there a link between body mass and serious COVID when no one is not causing the other? So they said, obesity does not increase your risk of dying from COVID, right? And then they say it's linked to race and ethnicity, it's linked to level of education. That same study that they linked to, conclusions and relevance. In this national cohort of VA patients, most SARS-CoV-2 deaths were associated with older age, male sex, and comorbidity burden. Right? So indeed, many factors previously reported to be associated with mortality in smaller studies were not confirmed, such as obesity. So they have a point according to this particular study, and I'll show you in a little while why this study is not the most relevant one, the most accurate one. Black race, Hispanic ethnicity, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, hypertension, and smoking. So they are claiming in this study that race isn't part of this. Dr. Larmie says it is linked to race and ethnicity based on this study, but the study itself says no, that's not at all a thing. And this is the problem, right? Quite often when people link to studies, they know you're not going to read the study. The cherry picking and saying obesity is not to blame, but then immediately blaming the other things is just insane. Now, of course, there's an agenda here. That's always what the case is. Now, they, of course, picked one of the few studies that said that those factors did not play a part. I will link to a study in Nature, study in Science, the CDC obesity data report, and all that sort of stuff. that shows clearly and demonstrably that when you're obese, non-healthy obese, and I'll stipulate that point, all right? If you're a non-healthy obese, then that comes with risks for COVID. The link is well established by now. More and more studies have been done into this. So the point isn't just that Dr. Larmie is being borderline dishonest with her information, but that they cherry pick information. They cherry pick from the conclusion of the study that backs them up on one end and directly contradicts what they claim on the other, with regards to them assigning blame for other stuff. And that is just, you cannot do this. This is one of my problems with the fat acceptance and the health at every size movement when it comes to extremists. Is that, or more extreme views, let me put it that way. Extremist is a rather dirty connotation. Apologies for that. With extreme views is that activists tend to go too far a little bit. And to throw health at every size and fat phobia, or whatever you call it, in with homophobia or racism and all that sort of stuff always seemed to me to be a step too far. And I know someone will write to me and say the books have been written. I'm like, yeah, I've read the book. The book is there's quite a lot of hogwash in that particular book. As in, it doesn't mean racism isn't a thing. It doesn't mean that the ideal for white men for a long time has been skinny white women, or that proportionalism or anti-curviness or whatever. But there is a difference between that and saying being morbidly obese or being obese is bad for your health. Right? We have to accept this, guys. If we cannot agree on the basics of science, on the basic truth, then we have a real problem in this debate. Right? Being obese, unless you're a sumo wrestler, and those guys and girls, or guys mainly, I don't know, are there female sumo wrestlers? I don't think so. So those guys are in tremendous shape. A sumo wrestler is as in tremendous health, is what I mean when I say tremendous shape. Those guys are technically obese, as in their body fat percentage is quite high, but they have very little visceral fat because they train 8, 9, 10, 12 hours a day. Their diet is all unprocessed stuff. Their diet is insane. These guys are not to be found eating at Domino's, right? Ever. These are top level athletes. It's the same as what I was watching over Christmas. The world's strongest men, right? Those guys are, and the same goes for strong lift women, by the way. BMI does not apply to them because they all weigh 380, 400 pounds. But they are in tremendous shape. The problem comes when that movement stops for sumo wrestlers. If they stay the same size, they run into real difficulty. Most strongmen die early because they're not tremendously healthy. Most top-level athletes, by the way, are not tremendously healthy. They are top-level athletes. They're always injured. They're always, and when we're talking health, we have to talk overall health, right? Right? Being obese puts more pressure and strain on the body than being non-obese does. Now, this is not me saying that a non-obese person is healthy or that non-obese people are healthier than obese people. I'm saying it's about risk factors. And the risk factors associated with obesity mean you're at an increased risk of various illnesses. Not that risk doesn't exist for others. I usually, whenever I say something along these lines, I get an email saying, yeah, but my skinny friend got cancer. Listen, it's all things being equal. Think of the non-obese person as, a person crossing a quiet road without looking, and the obese person crossing a busier road without looking. Now, the non-obese person can still get hit by a car, but the chances of it happening to the obese person are significantly larger. Right? And the more unhealthy obese, and again, I'll stipulate the unhealthy bit, more unhealthy obese you are, the busier the road is. The more things that cause you genetic issues, like what Dr. Larmie stated, the more genetic issues that you have. Poverty is also a thing. Of course it is. Right? We all know this. A level of education is always a thing. If you don't know how to cook, and talk level of education, I'm not talking about going to uni and all that. Because clearly there are 1 or 2 doctors that don't know what the fuck they're talking about. But I'm talking about level of knowledge. If you don't know how to cook, that's a real problem for health. Doesn't mean you'll be fat. No, of course it doesn't. Right? You could basically eat Subway every day. And have a salad every day and all that. Doesn't mean you're healthy. Lack of education has a real impact on health. Of course it does. Especially if you only get your email, if you get your health information from the Daily Mail. I think Dr. Mosley is right on everything. Right? Now, on their blog, they write things like, I'm not here to argue whether it's possible to be fat and healthy. That evidence already exists. And there are a number of books that have been written about it. Yeah, but nobody is saying that it is impossible to be fat and healthy. It's about risk. See, and it's statements like that that are the problem. Is it possible to be fat and healthy? Yes. Is it possible to be morbidly obese and healthy? Well, that's debatable. Especially if you look at joint issues and all that sort of stuff. But sure, Lizzo always comes up. So let's use Lizzo as an example. Lizzo moves around a lot and is going to be in better health, right, than a non-obese person that sits on their ass and smokes all day. Yeah, I'll grant you that. Of course I will, right? But just because books exist that say that it's possible to be fat and healthy, not everything you read in books is true, right? Goes for your blog, it goes for Game of Thrones. I mean, Game of Thrones is a book, the Bible is a book, 1984 is, okay, actually that is pretty much true these days, because God forbid you disagree with anyone on anything, right? And then you look at silly comments on their Instagram page about someone said losing 3 stones and my knee stopped hurting, and then they say, yes, this is what I hear a lot, whilst at the same time she then writes it off as anecdotal. Now, the science is clear that obesity causes stress on the joints. Any engineer will tell you this. That is the problem, or at least a massive contributor to the problem. No one in their right mind is saying that being skinny and losing weight solves all the problems. If you think that, then you've fundamentally misunderstood it. And if Dr. Larmie fought this for years and has now come to some sort of epiphany, and that almost seems to be the case, then they've completely misunderstood the science for years. But that is completely different from going to the other side and saying that there isn't an issue. When responding to a comment that said something along those lines, but exercise is good for you, they came up with an extreme example where someone is so disabled that they suffer from low energy and that might make them worse, which is just, why do you have to jump to the extreme 0.005% of the population? Right? And not just accept it for 99.995% of the population, exercise is a good thing. And when somebody gets told to exercise by a doctor, the doctor will probably know whether they have some really weird medical condition that prevents exercise at any level. And exercise, again, we have to define what exercise is. Right? By far most people with disabilities need exercise. Of course they do. Even if they suffer from low energy. It's exercise that has to be adapted. Not all exercise is created equal. Come on. No one is saying to these low energy people, now what you need to do is high intensity interval training and get Joe Wicks on the phone and fucking book this in every morning for half an hour ago. It'll make you feel better. No, what they're saying is movement makes people feel better. Stretching, helpful stretching, even assisted stretching and all that sort of stuff will make people feel better. That's what it's about. Don't stop coming up with extreme examples when someone makes a valid point. Right? Can we just do that? Is being fat a task factor for any negative outcomes? This was another question that that they were asked. And then the response was yes. And then their own comes as, is that because of the impact fat has on the body? And then they said no. In many cases, fat is protective. The negative outcomes are almost certainly due to the way society treats fat people. See for yourself, blah, blah, blah. And again, it's that oversimplification of the science, people. Because the comment is just not true. Fat is protective, yes, but only up to a point. Right? It's the Daily Mail. It's the Daily Mail way of doing business. It's the Daily Mail way of putting science out. That is so fucking exhausting when it comes to this stuff. Daily Mail always has an article about once a week. Chocolate is good for you. Right? Yeah, a piece of dark chocolate has components that are good for you. A glass of red wine every now and again is good for you because red wine has something in it. Something like that. Oh. But that's never what the study says. Right? Too much red wine, you're an alcoholic. Too much chocolate, and that comes out with its own health issues. Though according to, Dr. Mosley, you'll never be full. And this is where Dr. Larmie and Dr. Mosley are the same. They're both cherry picking information and using shitty science, air quotes, to make their case, and of course money off the back of that. Dr. Mosley selling books, and again, Dr. Larmie, the blogs are behind a fucking paywall or Patreon or whatever it is. I always ask people this question: if your message is so important, why isn't it free? But this goes for every activist out there. I get asked this question a lot with regards to HPMB. Right? Why do you not make it completely free? Yeah, okay, it's costing me a fortune. I give you 3 months free. After that, it becomes completely a choice. Also, whether you need it or not. I'll help you fix a problem for free. That's what I do. Because I think the message is important. Because I've always said this: postnatal health is a right, not a privilege. Right? So that means that the 3 months that you have, or 13 weeks or whatever it is, that other people charge you the world for, that should be free for people. Diastasis recti isn't a middle class problem. It's a problem for people who flip burgers, people with low disposable income, single mothers. You need this level of care, but you have better things to spend your money on. Right? And this always, when I look at pages by activists and they put things behind firewalls and Patreons and all that sort of stuff, I get very nervous. Because all you've done there, or all you're creating there, is a circle jerk of people that agree with you and that you can suck deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole, where you no longer welcome honest and open debate about things. Right? Where you want people to stick to your oversimplified, incorrect message. That is my problem. I have no doubt at all that a lot of work needs to be done in the health at every size movement and body acceptance and all that sort of stuff. It's important, and I agree, diet culture and Michael Mosley and all those guys are hacks, and we need to do stuff to stop these guys. But you can't do that with black and white messaging that denies fundamental truths for people's health. Can someone who's obese be healthy? Yeah. Of course. However, you're more at risk of things when you're obese. Can we agree on that? One thing doesn't rule out the other. And you cannot say and quote a study that says obesity is not a factor in COVID. And like I said, it's a shitty study. It was a very early on study and it was definitely before Delta. So obesity is not a factor, and then immediately say it is down to race and ethnicity when that same study says it's not. Come on. I don't sound like Gordon Ramsay there. Come on, you know better than this. Right? Number 3, and this will be a short one. Number 3, because I did say it was going to be a top 3.